"We wired $86,000 to Evan's Paris account today," my mother said as she raised her glass. Then she turned to me with a smile that felt like a door closing. "And you do not deserve any help." Laughter skimmed over the china like a cold wind. My father tapped his ring against his glass and said, "We invest where returns are real." My aunt breathed, "College is not for everyone," as if she were offering mercy. Evan slid a glossy box toward me. "Souvenir," he said, and when I lifted the lid, I saw nothing inside, just empty cardboard and tissue that crackled like a small joke that had grown teeth. Vanilla from the candles mixed with the smell of roast sauce and new money. Phones flashed. A cousin said, "Say something French, Evan," and he grinned and butchered a sentence while my mother dabbed her lipstick and watched me watching. I reached for my bag without asking permission and opened my banking app under the table. The family chat pinwheeled with photos of boarding passes and the CDG airport logo, all caps captions about Paris, about the future, about pride. My hand did not shake when I opened the education account that was supposed to be mine. A withdrawal blinked back at me. $5,200 for roof repair. I pictured the house we had just driven past, shingles clean as always, no ladders, no trucks, no tar. My father lifted his fork calm as a banker on television and said, "Numbers tell the truth. Of course we want Evan focused on studies, not money." My mother tilted her head. "Independence looks good on you," she said, as if advising a stranger in a store. Then she pulled a folded bill from her clutch, the restaurant invoice heavy with specials and wine, and set it by my plate. "You can take this, Avery. You believe in taking care of yourself." My chest went still. $2,000 was due for my dorm deposit at the end of the week. I had counted the hours at the cafe the tips rolled into rubber bands, the extra shifts I took when the Wi-Fi crashed, and I fixed it with a bent paper clip and a guess that turned out right. I slid my card from its sleeve. The waiter swiped. "Declined," he said softly. The word did not belong to him, but it cut clean anyway. My father cleared his throat and said, "We removed your dependent status this month. It was time." The table smiled like a portrait. Evan drummed his fingers on the lid of that empty box, the one he had called a souvenir, and asked if I wanted him to sign it for fun. The chandelier hummed. Somewhere behind me, a coffee grinder whined, then stopped. My mother's pearls shone, the way a warning light shines on a dashboard, bright and uninterested. I opened the banking app again and watched the little turning circle refuse to land on enough. My aunt asked what I planned to do next year. "Work," I said. She patted her napkin and said, "Good girl." The word girl found the edge of my patience and pressed down. I thought of the bus driver who used to wave when I was the first kid on in the dark of the app I built at 17, so kids could catch the last bus after practice of the certificate I printed, because no one asked to see it. I thought of the green bus pass still tucked in my wallet, the ink faded to the color of old grass. The room felt airless. My mother lifted her glass again. To Evan, she said to promise, and to Paris. Glasses chimed. A waiter slid the invoice nearer my hand, gentle as a nurse with a needle. I looked at the total and felt the strange calm that arrives when a storm is done scaring you. I placed my card back in its sleeve and pushed my chair back. The legs scraped a true line across the floor. I stood. "You will regret this." My mother said not loud, just pointed. My father said, "Do not be dramatic." Evan said, "Come on, it was a joke." My aunt said, "Sit down, eat." I picked up my coat. "I do not need permission," I said, and the words surprised me with how even they sounded. Outside, the air was cool and smelled like rain on hot pavement. Tacoma lights glittered on puddles like small currency. I walked to my car and sat with the engine off and the quiet on. The phone lit with another photo of Evan's ticket and the gate number and a string of hearts from relatives who always typed fast when the camera faced the son who could do no wrong. I opened my notes app and wrote a single sentence. I do not need permission. I need receipts. Then I started one more list timestamps, account numbers, the date of the roof that never had a ladder against it, the balance that should have been mine. I took one last breath of scented air, a mix of vanilla and rain, and turned the key. The wipers beat a steady metronome against the glass. I drove away without looking in the rearview mirror because there was nothing behind me I wanted to magnify. If this feels like toxic family or family betrayal type enough for quiet justice. I moved to Seattle a week after that dinner. The rain followed me up I-5 and tapped the windshield like someone keeping score. The studio on Pine Street was small and the heater clicked every few minutes. But it was mine and no one could decide how much I deserved. I unpacked, slowly stacking the chipped plates from Goodwill, setting my secondhand desk near the window, and when I pressed a strip of tape against the wall, I hung the green bus pass from high school. The ink faded and the plastic bent at the corners. It stared back like proof that every route could be rewritten. If you stayed long enough at the stop, I sat on the floor with my knees tucked up and remembered being 17, winning the local coding fair with that bus route app, the one that fixed missed transfers after 9 at night. The judges shook my hand and someone from the local paper asked for a photo. But when I held up the certificate at home, my mother barely glanced at it and said, "A hobby is cute, but it will not feed you." She bought Evan a brand new MacBook that week and said he would need real tools for his future. I learned then that silence hurt less than questions. Still, I kept building things that worked even if no one cared in the studio. The light from the street drifted across the floor in silver patches. I opened my laptop and pulled up the 529 account. The balance used to be $12,400 small, but enough for a semester buffer. Now it was bleeding, 4 withdrawals sat in a neat line with dates that made my stomach turn. April 20th, May 3rd, June 10th, July 1st, all labeled roof. The same roof I had stared at spotless under the Tacoma sun. I screenshotted each transaction, dragged them into a folder titled Receipts, and set the folder to Cloud Sync. My hands were steady. It felt strange to be steady. The next morning, I walked down Pine Street to the cafe where I had begged for hours when the dorm card declined. The manager remembered the night I fixed the Wi-Fi with nothing but instinct and a bent paper clip. He handed me 3 evening shifts and glanced at my shoes, like he knew I needed every tip after work. I sat at my desk again and opened the digital family cloud, the one I had paid for every month, because I handled the subscriptions photos of birthdays, graduation, Mother's Day, brunches, all stored there because it was convenient for them. I removed every shared device from Apple Family, watched their names vanish, row by row, then logged out the Amazon household I had set up. Back when I thought belonging came from free shipping somewhere in Tacoma, a delivery cart would hit a paywall and someone would ask why I did not smile. But my breathing eased on Netflix. I changed the password to something only I would remember. Maybe they would think the app glitched. Maybe Evan would call and demand access. I planned not to answer outside. The late summer air smelled of wet diesel and coffee grinds. A bus hissed to a stop below my window, and I thought of the driver who used to wave at me before dawn. He was the first person to treat me like I mattered. I wondered if he was still there, greeting kids who had no one driving them. 1 week passed, then 2. I built a spreadsheet with hours worked rent due, and the remaining tuition I watched the balance, like it was a creature that might survive, if I fed it enough attention. Then the email arrived from the bank. The subject line was long and formal. The body of the message explained that per temporary authorization, signed by Robert Cole, there had been additional access granted to the education account. Temporary authorization is what people say when they think the person with the name on the account will never check. My chest tightened, but not the way it did at that dinner. This time it felt like something locking into place. I saved the PDF, took screenshots of the timestamp, forwarded it to a new email address I created that morning, an address with no family history attached. I wrote in the memo line, just 3 words for later use. That night, I poured cereal for dinner and listened to the building settle pipes, knocking footsteps overhead, the city humming around me. I thought about calling someone, but I did not know who to trust with this kind of silence. So I talked to the room instead. I said out loud that money does not decide who deserves a future, and the room did not argue. The next evening, the rain returned, a soft drizzle that clung to the windows and made the neon signs smear red and blue across the glass. I walked to the grocery store for rice and eggs, and when my card slipped through the reader, I held my breath. Approved, the cashier handed me the bag and said, "Have a good night, small kindness," but it landed. On the way back, a notification buzzed on my phone. The family chat, a photo of Evan outside a museum in Paris, captioned, "Living the Dream." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Then I muted the conversation and archived it. I realized my world had shrunk to the size of this studio, but it was shrinking into something solid, something mine. I sat at the desk, opened my laptop, and began searching for part-time tech work in the city. Listings flickered by contract support, junior developer data entry, assistant, nothing glamorous. But every job meant fewer holes to fall through at midnight. I closed the laptop and touched the edge of the bus pass on the wall, remembering how I used to ride alone in the dark, how the bus always came. Eventually, if I waited in the quiet, I felt a small spark of belief. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady. A belief that I could build a life, brick by brick, even if the people who should have built beside me had decided I was not worth the cost. I crawled into bed and pulled the blanket to my chin. The heater cracked, the rain ticked, and somewhere between one breath and the next, I understood that independence was not punishment unless I let it be. I closed my eyes and let the city hold me. The receipts were saved, the numbers were logged, and tomorrow I would start again, but this time on my terms. October arrived with crisp air and yellow leaves piling in the gutters. I kept my head down and worked the evening shifts at the cafe on Pine. The espresso machine hissed like something alive, and the scent of coffee grounds clung to my hair. On a Tuesday night, I was wiping tables when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I should have ignored it, but I looked and saw the family group thread lighting up photo after photo of Evan in Paris filled the screen. He stood near the Louvre with a new jacket and sunglasses. He raised a paper cup of coffee in front of croissants. He smiled beside the Seine. While my mother wrote captions that pretended to be modest, "Some children bring honor." She typed her words, sharp as a blade. A cousin replied with heart emojis, and someone else wrote proud of him. No one asked about me because they had already decided the story. I slid the phone away and kept stacking chairs. The cafe was half empty, warm light pooling on the floor. Then a customer groaned at the corner table and said the Wi-Fi crashed. The manager tugged at his shirt collar and muttered that the router hated him. I knelt beneath the counter, reset the modem, traced the cables with my fingers the way I used to when I fixed our home network, and no one said thank you. 15 minutes later, the signal returned. The customers cheered quietly. The manager handed me 3 new night shifts, his way of saying, "You matter here. More than you think." With those shifts, I finally pushed my balance close to the $2,000 I needed for the deposit. I walked home at midnight with caffeine shaking in my blood and hope like a small flame in my chest. 2 days later, an email arrived from the bank. The subject line cold and polite, it read, "Your dependent status has been removed. No greeting, no apology, just numbers and fact." I stared at the screen. My breath slow. I had not asked them for a single cent since Tacoma. Still, they cut ties as if my existence cost them something. The unfairness rolled through my body like static. But I did not cry. I opened the cloud folder where thousands of family photos lived, the ones I had taken and edited. Christmas mornings, birthdays, graduation vacations. My mother's favorite shots with the perfect lighting. I removed every device that belonged to them, watched the names vanish one by one. I left the images but added a gentle watermark at the bottom edge of each photo. Used with credit, it was quiet, factual. Fair, I closed the laptop with a soft snap. That night, I worked another shift, and the cafe filled with students and couples. Steam rose from cups and coats, dripped rainwater on the floor. I wiped tables and collected mugs, my body tired but my mind clear. Then my phone rang. I saw my mother's name and felt a familiar stab of dread. I stepped behind the counter and answered her voice, blasted through the speaker. She demanded to know why the family cloud no longer synced. She insisted I fix it since I was so good with computers. The manager glanced over. Brows raised, I whispered that I was at work. She said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Stop embarrassing the family." The entire cafe fell silent. Cups paused mid-air. A student turned in his seat. Heat crawled up my neck, but I kept my voice steady. I hung up before she could say more. The manager set a hand on my shoulder and asked if I was all right. I lied and said, "Just tired." My phone buzzed again. Messages from my father saying I was acting childish. Evan chimed in with a laughing emoji and a note that I should be grateful for every scrap I walked into the staff room. Shut the door gently and breathed until the shaking eased. I had survived the first humiliation at that dinner table. Now this second one unfolded in public. And the worst part was how normal it seemed to them to strip me of dignity while sipping wine in Paris and tapping on new laptops. I returned to the front counter, took orders, smiled at strangers because someone needed to stay kind in that moment. Later at home, I lit the small desk lamp and looked at the bus pass on the wall, a reminder of who I had always been. The girl with the backpack, the one nobody photographed, the app builder. No one celebrated the person who carried her own weight even when her shoes were soaked through. I whispered to myself that humiliation could either drown you or sharpen you. I chose sharp. The next morning, the sun came out for a few hours, and Pine Street sparkled as if the city forgave the night before I bought a coffee and walked to the quiet bench near the bookstore. The wind lifted my hair, and I felt something uncoil inside me. I opened my banking app and saw the pending deposit from the extra shifts. Almost there, I thought I could pay the dorm. Finish the degree. Finish. What they said, I did not deserve. The family group. Chat buzzed again, another photo of Evan on a boat tour. My mother wrote, "He works so hard he deserves this break." Someone replied, "Wish." All kids were like that. The cruelty was casual and practiced. I archived the chat permanently, then typed a reminder into my notes. Independence is not punishment. It is proof. That evening, I returned to the cafe, poured cappuccinos, fixed a grinder that jammed a woman at the counter, thanked me for helping her daughter get the Wi-Fi to print a scholarship application. Her gratitude felt real, more real than any forced smile across a polished dinner table. As I walked home, the streetlights flickered against the puddles, and for the first time since Tacoma, I believed that maybe the quiet was not empty. Maybe it was space to build something that no one could delete with a signature or a caption. January brought a cold that sank into bone, the kind of gray that made Seattle feel older than it was. But I kept walking to Pine Street with my coat zipped high and my laptop slung over my shoulder. The cafe heated my hands and paid my bills, and at night I coded at the small desk by the window. Sometimes until dawn brushed pale light across the buildings one night. In early February, the Wi-Fi sputtered again and I crouched under the counter, tracing wires, thinking of the empty souvenir box and the way my mother's voice carried over wine glasses when I fixed the system. A man with square glasses and calm eyes walked over. He introduced himself as Jay Park, the operations lead for a small logistics startup in Fremont. He said he had watched me troubleshoot 3 times. Now he asked what I studied. I told him computer science. He asked if I ever got bored of fixing routers and espresso machines. I said boredom was a luxury. He told me to come by their office in Fremont. If I wanted extra work that week, I took a bus north, crossing the bridge as early fog curled around the water. The building was small glass walls and whiteboards, coffee cups everywhere, people typing with the quiet urgency of those who believe their work mattered. Jay pointed to a desk and said, "Stay if you want." I opened my laptop and began cleaning data sets for delivery routes, simple at first, then deeper, writing small functions that trimmed minutes from each path in March. He stood behind me while I tested a new module and saw the map change color as inefficiencies fell away. He asked if I had built route optimizers. Before I said only as a hobby, he said hobbies were how companies were born. He gave me a badge and a key card. That night, I stayed until the janitor turned off the hallway lights a little after midnight. Jay returned with takeout. He put the containers on my desk and said, You look like someone who forgets to eat." I opened the cartons and laughed softly. The food was warm and the gesture warmer. In April, we piloted the module for 5 flower shops around Seattle. The drivers tested our reroutes. Fuel logs dropped delays. Shrank one owner cried when her delivery costs fell by 18%. She hugged me as if I had saved her a fortune. Jay clapped my shoulder and said, "Customers speak with receipts." That same week, the company gave me a $3,000 bonus for the prototype. The number felt unreal. I walked to the post office and bought a postal money order. Crisp and official, I mailed it to the university and paid off the last of the semester debt. No one cheered, no photos, no confetti. But standing outside the post office, watching buses roll by, I felt a quiet pride settle into my bones. That night, I opened my family's group email, attached a simple invoice for $0, and typed "emotional labor, retroactive, paid in full by silence." I sent it, not to be cruel, but to level the ground. I had edited essays and retouched photos and covered up embarrassments for years, and now I owed nothing. I closed the email and went back to work in May. One of the drivers brought pastries to the office. He said the route saved him 2 hours a week and enough fuel to take his kids on a weekend trip. His gratitude felt like sunlight cutting through rain. Jay invited me to a meeting with the board and introduced me as the coder who made math into magic. I swallowed the sudden sting in my throat and nodded, because no one had ever spoken about me like that one afternoon. Near the end of May, my phone buzzed while I was reviewing code. A message from Evan appeared, written like a casual request. He said Paris offered an elective course. He needed $1,200 for registration. He said I could spot him since I was always good with money. I stared at the screen, reread his words. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. And then I locked the phone and set it face down, seeing no reply. The silence was not anger. It was clarity. I owed him nothing that evening. I sat by the office window and watched boats cross Lake Union, small and determined in the fading light. Jay asked if I was all right. I said yes and told the truth. For the first time in a long time, I was tired of being useful, only when someone wanted something. He nodded like he understood more than he said. In June, our pilot expanded to a bakery, a bookstore, and a courier service. Their reports came back with numbers that made the investors lean forward. Jay asked me to present at the quarterly meeting. My voice shook at first, but steadied when I realized no one interrupted me. They listened truly. Listened after the meeting. I returned to my desk and saw another message from Evan, shorter this time, just question marks. I closed the thread and opened my code again. The keys clicked beneath my fingers, and I felt the world shrinking to the space I could control. Late that night, I rode the bus home. The driver nodded like he recognized a kind of loneliness. The sky drizzled and the streetlights glowed on wet pavement. When I reached Pine Street, I stood outside the studio door and watched rain slide off the awning. I remembered the bus pass on my wall, the faded letters, the years of waiting in the dark. I used to think the world was a place you earned by pleasing people. Now I saw it was a place you built when no one believed you could. I went inside, dried my hair, and opened my laptop. The module blinked on screen, the code waiting steady and patient like a promise no one could take from me. Work became the only language that made sense. I typed until the sun rose pale and soft, the heater hummed, the city woke, and somewhere far away my family likely slept in houses paid for by the same money they said I never deserved. I let the thought go, because I was building something larger than their smallness, something they would never understand until it stood in front of them with its own proof and its own receipts. July arrived with a heat that made the sidewalks shimmer, and the ferries cut bright paths across the Sound. The office in Fremont smelled of whiteboard markers and old coffee, and Wayfinder kept growing quietly every week. Another business asked to test our routes every week, more proof that the work had weight. Still, something in my chest stayed tangled. A knot named family and numbers and silence one Friday evening. I walked to the bank after work, the lobby cold with air conditioning and fluorescent lights that hummed above my head. I requested a full statement of the 529 account. The teller printed a stack of pages and slid them across the counter. Each sheet held a truth someone hoped I would never see. 3 large withdrawals stood out in the rows of transactions. 3,800, 2,100, 1,500, all with the same memo roof. The ink stared back without flinching. I tucked the papers into my bag and stepped outside. The sun low over Fremont Bridge. I found a bench and called 3 roofing companies in Tacoma. I gave them the dates, the amounts, the address. Each company told me the same thing. They had no record of work, no invoice, no subcontractor, no crew on that street. The heat pressed against my skin, yet a cold settled under my ribs, not the shock of discovering theft, but the confirmation of something I already suspected. I ended the last call and breathed. Slow, the city moved around me. Bicycles rattling over the metal bridge buses, sighing as they stopped and started. I walked to a small cafe and bought an iced tea. The cup sweated in my hand, as if the drink knew I needed something to ground me. That weekend, I opened my laptop and created a new bank account under my name only. No joint access, no shared login. I set an automatic transfer of 15% from every paycheck into a fund I titled Freedom Fund. The name made me feel 13 again. The age I first realized no one was coming to save me. I pressed confirm and watched the balance start small but real, a currency of progress. On Sunday morning, I opened my social media and unfollowed every family member. The feed wiped. Clean silence filled the screen. I followed only my grandmother Elena, her page filled with pictures of her garden and the ocean she lived in Gig Harbor, where the water touched the edges of rocky shore. Sometimes she posted quotes about forgiveness, but never demanded anyone perform it. She was the only one who never asked me to choose between myself and them in August. I took a ferry to visit her. The wind tangled my hair and salt clung to my lips. When I reached her small house, she hugged me so gently I almost cried. We sat on her porch with lemonade and watched the light dance on the water. She did not ask about Paris or Evan. She asked if I was eating and if I was sleeping, and if the work made me proud. I told her it did. And she smiled soft as tide foam when I returned home that evening. I felt steadier. The world still cruel at the edges, but kinder where I built my own shelter in September. Business picked up and Wayfinder signed a letter of intent with a regional courier. The team clapped, and someone bought cupcakes. I ate one with sprinkles and pretended for a moment that I was just another 20-something finding her way, not the girl who stood outside a restaurant with a declined card. Later that week, my phone rang the number unknown but local. I answered and heard a man from a flower shop in Tacoma. He said there was a delivery for Evan scheduled under my number cost on delivery. He asked if I would be home to pay. I blinked, confused. He read the address, my parents' house. I told him I had not ordered flowers. He paused, then said the note included my mother's phone, but was placed under my account. He sounded tired, like he had seen this trick before. I said I would send an email to confirm no charge should be collected from me. I asked for his email. He gave it polite and weary. I hung up and the anger rose slow. Not like a flame, but like water filling a room. I wrote a letter to the shop stating I had not ordered anything and that the sender must pay at the door. I attached the transaction records for the 529 withdrawals proof that my family used my identity freely when it suited them, and I copied the general inbox of the shop so the message could not disappear. An hour later, the shop replied, thanking me and confirming they would collect payment directly from the recipient. I stared at the email and felt a pulse of dark humor. They used my number to send flowers to the Golden Sun and expected me to foot the bill, a small theft disguised as celebration. That night, I walked to the waterfront, watched kayakers glide under the last streaks of sunset. I told myself quiet victories were still victories. I went to work on Monday. Drafted a report for Jay, fixed a line of code that had been throwing errors. He looked over my shoulder and said, "Good work, Avery." The words simple but sincere. I saved them in the place inside me that needed gentle proof in October. A heavy rainstorm swept across the region, the roads slick and shining. I sat in my studio listening to the drops hammer the window, thunder rumbling like distant warning. My laptop open on my knees, I thought of the 3 withdrawals, the fake roof repairs, the flowers, the humiliation. It all threaded together in a pattern that felt too familiar. Take what you want and tell her. She is dramatic for noticing the storm passed after midnight. The sky washed clean in November. The mornings grew darker. I wore gloves on the bus and watched my breath fog the window. The Freedom Fund balance climbed one deposit at a time, not fast but steady, each dollar a quiet promise. I stopped checking my family's profiles entirely. Their world did not need to spill into mine. Instead, I called Elena once a week. She told me stories about her garden, about the neighbor's cat who liked to sleep on her porch. She asked if I was safe. I said yes, and I meant it. Winter crept closer. The city strung lights across storefronts. Strangers held warm cups and hurried through cold gusts in the office. Jay said we might spin our module into a dedicated project. The other engineers nodded. The founders watched the data, piling up our results no longer. A coincidence. They were proof of value. Value built from sleepless nights, and quiet determination value. They could measure in dollars and fuel saved and routes optimized. I walked home with that thought tucked in my chest. The numbers mattered. The work mattered, and for the first time in years, I felt like my life was mine, untouched by anyone's permission or contempt. I closed the studio door behind me, set my laptop on the desk, and touched the bus pass on the wall. The green plastic cool against my fingertips, broken routes, better paths. I whispered not loud, just enough to hear the future in my own voice. December arrived cold and sharp, the kind of cold that made breath hang in the air like ghosts refusing to leave the holiday lights. In Tacoma glowed warm, but I felt none of it, because Linda had found a new game, and she played it with cruel precision. I learned from a coworker who still followed her online that she told people I had taken loans from family and refused to pay. She spread it in church groups and neighborhood chats, a quiet smear campaign wrapped in polite concern. Every rumor sharpened the same blade. Avery is ungrateful. Avery owes us. Avery is an embarrassment. I sat in my little studio in Belltown and stared at the blank wall. The words stung, because they came from the woman who once braided my hair before school and tucked love notes in my lunch. I opened my laptop and scheduled a therapy session, the first in years. The first time I admitted out loud that the wounds were not healed just because I stopped bleeding. Naomi Brooks was calm, with glasses that reflected the soft lamp in her office and a voice steady enough to hold weight. She listened without interrupting. I told her about the 529 thefts, the card decline, the flowers, the smear campaign. She leaned forward slightly and said, "You need boundaries. You can enforce not boundaries. You hope they respect." She wrote 3 short lines on a card and slid it across her desk. "No money, no guilt, no surprise visits." She said, "Those are full sentences. You owe no footnotes." I tucked the card in my coat pocket. The words heavier than they looked in late January. I visited Elena again in Gig Harbor. The air smelled of seaweed and salt. She sat wrapped in a knitted shawl at the kitchen table, her hands thin with age but warm when she held mine. She said nothing about rumors or money. She simply handed me a faded envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her handwriting shaky but clear. Elena Trust to Avery School. It was not a formal legal document, just a grandmother trying to leave a piece of light for the child who never asked for the storm. I closed the envelope and pressed it to my chest. For a moment, she smiled as if she knew I needed more than money. I needed someone to believe me, to believe in me. When I drove back toward Seattle, the water shimmered under winter sun. I felt stronger than I had in months in February. A small but satisfying revenge surfaced. I logged into my Costco account and removed Robert's ad on he had used my membership for years without ever paying a cent. I clicked remove and saved the change. A tiny victory, a reminder that control can be reclaimed inch by inch. A week later, I heard from a cousin that Robert and Linda were stopped at checkout. The membership denied they caused a scene and stormed out. My cousin laughed, telling the story not knowing. I was the reason the laughter tasted bittersweet that night. I made soup on the stove, steam rising slow. My apartment felt quiet but safe. The city lights flickered outside the window like distant stars. In March, something darker unfolded. The smear campaign grew louder. Linda posted a family album on Facebook labeled Family, only a collage of holiday photos, vacations, birthdays, all carefully arranged to show a perfect life. Except I was missing my face, cut out of a Christmas morning photo, my arm visible around the edge, my sweater sleeve recognizable, but my face erased clean, as if I never existed. I stared at the screen for a long time, my chest heavy, my breathing shallow. It was one thing to insult me or lie about me. It was another to remove me from memory. That night, I sat on the floor of my studio with the bus pass in my hand and tried to untangle the feeling, pain, and disbelief, and something like mourning Naomi had told me. Family can wound like strangers because they know where the bones are soft. I lay down on the carpet and closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cars on wet pavement. I whispered to myself that I was still here, that erasing me from a photo did not erase my existence, my work, my progress, my future. The next morning, I woke up early, the kind of early where the sun barely kissed the horizon. I brewed coffee and opened my laptop. I reviewed code, answered emails, pushed updates. Wayfinder kept moving. Success did not care about who believed I deserved it. Success only cared about effort and results at lunch. I put on my coat and walked down to the waterfront. Sea lions barked somewhere near the pier. Gulls circled overhead. I thought about the lies, the album, the humiliation, and realized something quiet but powerful. I did not need them to apologize to heal. I only needed to keep living free from their grip that evening. I received a text from an unknown number. It was a screenshot from someone in the old neighborhood, a comment under Linda's album. Someone wrote, "Where is?" Avery Linda replied, "We do not associate with failures." The words burned, but underneath the burn was a spark. If they wanted me invisible, that meant they feared my presence. They feared my progress. I closed the message and exhaled slow. The spark grew into resolve. That weekend, I wrote a letter to myself, not for anyone to read, just to remind me I was building something real. I wrote about the Freedom Fund, the new account, the boundaries. The work I wrote that I would define my worth through action, not approval. March ended with cherry blossoms blooming in the city, pale pink clouds against gray skies. I walked beneath them on my way to the bus stop petals scattered around my feet, and for the first time since the humiliating dinner, I felt a strange peace. Not happiness, not forgiveness, but peace born from clarity. I did not need their help. I did not need their permission. I only needed momentum, and momentum was already mine. April 2023 arrived with gray skies and endless drizzle, the kind of rain that made Tacoma feel hushed and heavy. I was coding a delivery route update when my phone buzzed with a message from a distant cousin. "Elena is in the hospital ICU. Come now." My chest tightened and I grabbed my coat. The bus ride felt endless, every stop a reminder of how fragile time can be when I reached Tacoma General Hospital. I texted Linda asking for room information, and she replied with a cold warning, "Do not bring drama." "We are managing things." That sentence hit like a slap, as if grief had rules, and she wrote the handbook. I asked a nurse for visiting hours and learned I could see Elena at 7:30 in the morning. So I returned the next day in scrubs of soft light through the hallway and the smell of antiseptic and warm linen. Elena was small under the blankets, oxygen mask covering half her face. Machines whispered steady digital rhythms. I sat beside her and held her hand. Her skin felt cool, but her grip was still there, faint but real. I whispered everything I had not been able to say. Thank you for loving me, when love felt conditional. Everywhere else, thank you for seeing me when silence tried to erase me. She opened her eyes slowly, and through the oxygen, she pushed out a few words. Do not argue, keep receipts, build peace. The sentence landed like a commandment carved into stone. Her eyes closed again, and the machine beeped unchanged, but her chest stopped rising. The nurse stepped in and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. I felt the room tilt, as if grief had its own gravity. I cried quietly. Not the loud kind, just a steady stream that tasted of salt and fear and release. After signing the necessary papers, I sat in the hospital chapel, the stained glass, glowing with morning light. I thought of the bus pass, the humiliation in the restaurant, the vanished money, and the way Elena had always reminded me that dignity matters, even when no one else is watching. 2 days later, the lawyer called and spoke in a voice both formal and sympathetic. Elena left you $25,000 in her will for education or life on your own terms. I inhaled sharply, not because of the amount, but because she had chosen me, fully and quietly like she always did. Then came the expected storm. Linda called, demanding that the funds be sent to her to manage. She said, we will divide it fairly once family needs are covered. She said it as if fairness was something she had ever offered me. I told her the lawyer would manage everything, and hung up before her voice turned venomous. Later that week, a reporter from a small local paper emailed asking for comment about Elena's life and family. I deleted the email I posted. No tribute online. I did not write poetic captions. I simply wrote handwritten thank you notes to the nurses who held her hand when I could not. I mailed them with black ink and quiet respect. It was my way of freezing the noise before it began. Grief did not need an audience. One evening in May, I walked by the waterfront. The sunset smeared gold across the cold gray water. People were laughing near the cafe. The world kept moving even when my heart cracked. I heard my phone vibrate and saw a voicemail from the lawyer, his tone firm. Linda is delaying paperwork. She is claiming she needs to review distribution and verify your eligibility. I felt my jaw tighten. She could not let Elena's gift pass without poisoning it. I lifted my head and watched gulls cut through the sky, sharp and certain. I returned home and opened my laptop. I reviewed the estate documents, the signatures, the notarized seals, every detail clean and legal. The next morning, I sat in the lawyer's office. Fluorescent lights buzzing above the carpet, a dull pattern of beige squares. I signed a notice of demand, a formal request requiring release of my inheritance within the legal timeline. My signature trembled slightly, but my voice did not. I told the lawyer I was done letting them treat my life like a toy they could bend or hide. He nodded and said, "You are doing this the right way." When I walked out, the summer air felt warm, almost soft. I stopped at a small bakery and bought a single croissant, flaky layers falling onto the tiny plate. I took a bite and noticed how good it tasted. Grief and strength can live in the same moment. June bled into July and the legal pressure worked. Papers moved forward. Linda tried to call twice, but I declined both times. One evening, she left a voicemail accusing me of disrespecting the family and stealing what should be shared. I listened once and then deleted it without reacting. Silence can be louder than shouting. Sometimes silence is justice without yelling. In August, the funds cleared into my account. I stared at the number, $25,000. Money made of love and belief, not guilt or control. Part of me wanted to cry again, but instead I let out a long, slow breath and whispered, "Thank you, Elena." I opened a savings folder titled Freedom Fund and transferred the inheritance there, untouched and untainted. That night, I lit a small candle in my apartment, the flame steady the room, warm. I read her handwritten note. Again, the ink faded at the edges, the handwriting shaky but the meaning strong. I thought about Linda's smear campaign, the photo album. Without me, the rumors, the humiliations, and I realized Elena had given me more than money. She had given me clarity, dignity, and proof that family is not defined by blood, but by protection, by truth, by who stands with you when you have nothing. Grief still hurt, but it no longer owned me. And in the quiet of that night, with city lights shimmering outside the window, I promised myself I would honor her, not with anger, but with growth, not with cruelty, but with progress. I promised I would keep receipts, build peace, and walk forward, even if I had to walk alone. September arrived with crisp air over Lake Union, the kind that makes everything look sharper and more honest, and Waypoint officially split into Wayfinder Labs. I stood in a conference room with glass walls and water glittering beyond the windows, my signature on the CTO contract still drying on the page. Jay smiled and said, "You earned this, Avery, not through favors, not through family, but through grit." I nodded because I finally felt the truth of that sentence in my bones. The first contract with the city of Bellevue came 2 weeks later, a logistics pilot worth enough to push our revenue into the positive. The numbers glowed across the spreadsheet like a quiet promise. Green bars climbing invoices paid on time. The work mattered, and no one could take it from me that night. I sat in my tiny shared house on Capitol Hill laptop, warm against my knees, microwave humming in the kitchen, and I watched the routing algorithm update in real time. Small things that no one celebrated, but they felt like bricks in a new foundation. I remembered Elena's voice, "Keep receipts, build peace," and it hit me that peace did not always come from reconciliation. Sometimes peace came from boundaries firm and silent to mark the space where I ended, and they could not enter. The next morning, I stared at the outdated modem in the corner of the living room, still broadcasting a generic network name. And without thinking too hard, I opened the settings page and rewrote it. The new Wi-Fi name lit up across my phone screen. "You don't deserve free Wi-Fi." A small private joke that made me laugh for the first time in months, a tiny rebellion, but it felt like reclaiming a room inside my own life. None of the roommates noticed, but I did, and that was enough. October slipped into November. Rain streaked down those glass office windows. Our small team huddled over dashboards and heat maps. We ate cheap takeout and celebrated little victories. The first time a florist messaged saying your tool saved us 2 hours today, I screenshotted it and pinned it to my desktop. I let myself feel proud, and then came the phone call I knew would eventually arrive. I was walking back from a food truck sandwich, warm in my hand, when my phone lit up with Robert's name. The ringtone slicing through the cool night air, I almost let it go to voicemail. But curiosity won for a second. His voice sounded heavy and theatrical. "Avery, listen. Evan is coming home soon and he needs a deposit for his apartment. We are short $6,000. I need you to transfer it tonight." He said it with the same tone someone might use to request salt at a dinner table, as if financial robbery was a casual chore. I stopped walking and leaned against a brick wall, the city glowing around me, cars passing with their headlights smearing white across wet pavement. I said, "Why should I send money for a grown man who spent $86,000 of funds meant for us both? Funds you told me I did not deserve." Robert inhaled sharply and snapped, "We do not need attitude, just help your family." I could almost see his clenched jaw, the same self-righteous glare he used when handing out punishments disguised as discipline. I closed my eyes and remembered therapist Naomi's boundary script written on a small card in my wallet. The ink a little faded. No money, no guilt. No surprise visits. I repeated the words slowly and evenly. Robert talked over me. "You are ungrateful. You only think about yourself. Evan is your brother." His voice grew louder, demanding, as if volume could create morality. I waited until he finished. Then I said a single calm sentence. "I will not be sending any money." And before he could spit another insult, I pressed. And the screen went dark. My heartbeat shook, but my hands were steady. I opened my carrier settings and changed my phone number. The new digits felt like a clean slate carved out of the digital noise. The next morning brought a different kind of silence. No calls, no texts, no guilt packages wrapped in fake sweetness, just work and a warm cup of coffee and my own breath rising in the cold air. December came with frost on the docks and white lights across downtown Wayfinder hit a new milestone. Our routing engine optimized enough miles to save small businesses, thousands in fuel costs. Jay high-fived me in the hallway and said, "I told you this mission matters." And it did. It mattered to every driver who got home earlier, every bakery that didn't waste money, every florist who could cut their delivery time in half one night. I walked out onto the Lake Union dock behind the office water, rippling like black glass, the city lights shimmering across it. I remembered the night I left the restaurant in the rain, the humiliation of a declined card, the sting of Evan's smirk. The sentence "you do not deserve help" echoing in my head like a curse, and I whispered into the cold air. I deserved more than they ever gave. I deserved honesty, dignity, a chance. I deserved myself. I took out my phone and checked the Freedom Fund balance it had grown, because every paycheck I moved 15% a little at a time, slow but steady, tiny stones building a castle. One grain at a time, I thought of Elena and felt a warmth that wasn't just grief anymore. It was gratitude shaped into purpose. The next day, Jay brought up an idea about scaling Wayfinder into a fully independent structure. He wanted me to represent the technical vision at a city meeting. I sat in the room filled with city planners, maps taped across whiteboards, and arrows showing traffic flow. And when they nodded at my explanation and approved the full rollout, I realized that every humiliation they gave me, every time they cut me out, every time they laughed, it had become fuel, quiet, and steady fire. I did not need their validation. I did not need their applause. I just needed to continue. Later that week, I stopped by my apartment and my roommate laughed, reading the Wi-Fi name on her laptop. She said, "Bold choice," and I shrugged with a smile because it finally felt good to claim my space without apology. By the time New Year's Eve arrived, I stood on the rooftop of a downtown bar watching fireworks burst across the Seattle sky, the colors blooming and fading like breathing stars. I felt the weight of the past, but also the freedom that came with saying no. The clarity of boundaries was more powerful than any screaming confrontation. I did not owe them noise. I did not owe them pain. I owed myself peace. The city cheered below the wind, cold but kind, and I whispered again this time, not to the water, but to the sky. I am done being someone's backup plan. I am done proving my worth to people committed to denying it. I walked home with my hands in my pockets and my heart steady, and as I turned the key in my door, the apartment warm and quiet. I realized this was the beginning of my life on my terms, finally and completely. January 2024 opened with pale winter lights sliding across the glass walls of our South Lake Union office, the lake dark and still below. Wayfinder had grown quietly while everyone was busy watching louder companies. Flame Out, our routing engine, produced its first full case study. 5 delivery fleets reported fuel savings. Between 20 and 28% drivers got home earlier. Small businesses saved real money, and a local business journal published a headline that made my chest tighten with something like pride. Seattle's quiet efficiency. They mentioned my name without mentioning my family, without comparing me to Evan, without implying I was lucky. They wrote about merit numbers results. I clipped the article and tucked it into a small folder that I kept in my desk, the folder where I stored every proof that I was not a burden, not a joke, not the disappointment they branded me as. And in February, after months of legal pressure, the funds from the Elena Trust finally arrived by wire $25,000. The number glowed on my banking app while rain tapped the office windows. I whispered thank you because this money felt clean-earned and given with love. Not extracted with shame. I spoke with a financial planner who asked me if I had a dream goal. I said stability, a home where no one could kick me out a door with my name on it, a place where silence was peace instead of punishment. We looked at listings in Medina, quiet streets near the lake houses with cedar shingles and soft lawns and quiet evenings in March. I walked into a foyer smelling of lemon and polished wood, the windows opening toward Lake Washington. The real estate agent whispered, "It is 5 million, Ava. You can walk away." But instead, I walked deeper into the living room, where sunlight danced across hardwood floors, and the water shimmered beyond the glass doors. I saw myself there, coding at a kitchen table while the dishwasher hummed, and no one belittled me for existing. I saw birthday cakes that no one used as leverage friends who came to dinner without judgment, a life that belonged entirely to me. 2 weeks later, I signed Avery Cole, printed in thick black ink, my hands shaking but steady, the down payment pulled from savings and the inheritance. Elena left money turned into something solid and grounded, a roof that would never be snatched away. The first night I did not bring furniture, just a sleeping bag, a small lamp, and the framed bus pass I had kept since the day I was cut out of that dinner. The green bus pass that once felt like humiliation now felt like a victory flag. I placed it inside a glass frame with a short line printed at the bottom. Broken roots. Better paths. The words, soft and simple. A reminder that even detours can become directions. In April, I stood in my empty kitchen drinking tea, while contractors discussed shelving and light fixtures. The lake sparkled outside, everything calm. I had a meeting with Jay later that day. We were pitching Wayfinder's expansion to another fleet, and I realized how far I had traveled since that rainy night outside the restaurant in May. I bought a simple gray couch, a dining table with 4 chairs and a bookshelf. Nothing extravagant, just a foundation for a life that felt earned, not borrowed that evening. I set up the Ring security system, scrolling through the guest list and realizing my family still had lingering access. The thought of them watching my porch, my deliveries, my life made my skin crawl. I removed every name connected to them, clicked save, and felt a quiet sense of safety settle across the house. Mini revenge wrapped in security, but also a boundary written in code and Wi-Fi signals in June. Wayfinder landed a new partnership with a chain of bakeries. They sent boxes of pastries to celebrate, and I took one home, eating it on my back patio, while the air smelled like lake water and fresh-cut grass. Every bite tasted like something I built for myself. No strings, no shame. July drifted in with warm evenings and cicadas buzzing in the tall trees. I walked the neighborhood and nodded politely to neighbors who waved. I felt like a real person among real lives, not an outsider, begging to be included. It was late August when the twist arrived. I was trimming lavender near the driveway when I heard the slow crunch of tires on gravel. A silver rental car rolled past the front gate, slowing almost imperceptibly. The driver leaned forward, and I recognized the outline of Evan's face, thinner now. Pale, his eyes wide like someone staring at a ghost. His gaze slid across the stone pillar where the address plaque gleamed, and beneath it, carved in brushed steel, was my name, Avery Cole. I saw the moment it hit him. His breath caught. His mouth opened slightly. He stared at the house like it was impossible, like the math of it did not compute. Then he sped up tires, spitting dust, the car disappearing around the bend. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed even though the number was unfamiliar. Voicemail only. I pressed play and his voice came through, broken and high-pitched and trembling. Mom Avery bought a house in Medina, a $5 million house. Her name is on the gate. Why does she have this? What is going on? I need help. Please call me. Silence followed, then a small, wet gasp. Evan crying like a child denied candy. I listened once, then deleted it. I sat on the patio with the lavender scent thick in the warm air, the sun drifting toward the water, and for the first time I realized I did not feel anger or triumph or revenge. I felt distance. Peaceful. Distance. Their panic no longer touched me. Their demands bounced off invisible walls they could not cross. I locked my phone, leaned back in my chair, and watched a sailboat glide across the lake, the world steady and bright. I was no longer the kid with a bus pass and borrowed space. I was a woman who built her own home, her own life, her own peace. And there was no road back to the version of me they once controlled. The house settled in quiet calm around me. And I whispered a thank you to Elena to every night I coded, instead of crying to every boundary I learned to hold. And as the lavender swayed in the breeze, I understood that sometimes the softest life is the loudest victory. October arrived with crisp air curling around the Fairmont Olympics marble pillars, chandeliers glowing like frozen stars above the Seattle Education Fund Gala. The room filled with donors in dark suits and glittering dresses. I stood near the back with a glass of sparkling water, listening to speeches about opportunity, equity scholarships, all the words. My family never applied to me. Then I heard a familiar voice cut through the murmuring crowd. Linda dressed in a navy gown and pearls that caught every flash of the cameras. Robert beside her with a strained smile. They walked table to table, shaking hands as if nothing in the world had ever been cruel, as if they had not abandoned one child to feed another when they reached me. Linda tilted her head in a delicate half smile and said through tight teeth, "You look presentable." And Robert added that things had been hard. The roof still needed fixing. He was out of work and Evan was still looking for a job, as if reciting a script of misfortune designed to pull sympathy like a lever. I stared at them and saw no apology, just strategy. They believed I was still the child who would bend the daughter, who would hand over anything, because guilt dressed itself as duty when the host announced an open floor for personal contributions. I felt my pulse steady. I walked toward the stage heels tapping across marble, the sound crisp and final. The microphone felt warm under my fingers, and the room fell quiet, cameras lifted, glasses lowered. I said, "Thank you for the chance to speak my voice calm. I want to offer a personal contribution tonight." Then I unfolded a white check, the ink bold against the paper. $86,000, gasps rippled across the tables. I lifted the check slightly so the cameras could capture the number. I said, "This scholarship is for girls who were told you do not deserve help." My words echoed across the ballroom and I saw Linda freeze, her lips parting just enough to reveal shock. I continued, "I once had a college fund, a small 529 account. $12,400, rations of hope placed there for my future. It vanished in 4 withdrawals. 3,800, 2,100, 1,500 listed under roof repairs. Yet there were no invoices, no contractors, no receipts. I held up a slim folder of printed statements. The crowd leaned forward. Breath held some whispering. Robert's face turned gray under the bright chandeliers. I spoke slowly because the truth did not need volume. Tonight, I turned that theft into something better. This gift is in honor of my grandmother, Elena, who believed girls deserve education without begging for permission, who told me keep receipts and build peace. I placed the check into the host's hands and stepped aside. Cameras followed every movement, capturing the stillness that fell across the room. Then applause erupted, loud enough to shake glass, loud enough to drown a decade of dismissal. People stood tables scraped against polished floors. The sound washed over me in waves. I saw Linda, pale mascara, trembling at the corner of her eyes. Robert stared at the stage as if he had witnessed a ghost. The host thanked me with a voice that wavered slightly, then gestured to display screens where the donation amount glowed bright. One of the camera operators turned, and the lens zoomed straight to Linda's frozen expression, her shock immortalized in pixels, proof that quiet justice did not need shouting after the speeches ended. I stepped outside to the courtyard where golden lights draped across the hedges. Guests brushed past me, offering warm smiles. One woman squeezed my hand and whispered, "That was brave." Another said, "Thank you for speaking for all of us who were told we were nothing." I nodded, words tangled in my throat, the night air cool against my flushed cheeks. I pulled out my phone and drafted a thank you email to the event committee. Simple and polite, I typed at the end, "Invest in character, not image." Then pressed, "Send a tiny stroke of poetic honesty tucked inside perfect courtesy." When I re-entered the ballroom, I saw Evan standing near the exit, shoulders hunched, phone gripped in shaking fingers. He looked like a child caught with broken glass. His eyes glistened as he dialed. I could hear him whispering into the phone, "Mom." I think everyone knows Mom. "Please come get me." "Mom." They are recording. And Linda appeared beside him, her expression stiff and panicked. She tried to pull him toward the door, but every step was filmed by quiet onlookers, whose faces held no sympathy, only understanding the consequences were not mine to carry anymore. As the night thinned and guests drifted toward their cars, an older man in a silver suit approached his voice, soft. "My foundation wants to match your contribution. If you are willing to name the scholarship after Elena." I inhaled sharply, caught off guard by the possibility that a small, quiet life could ripple out into something larger. I thanked him and nodded, trying to swallow emotion that kept rising like a tide. I walked to my car under the soft street lamp's heels, clicking along the stone path, and for the first time in years, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. When I reached home, I sat in my kitchen with the lights off, only moonlight spilling across the counter. I replayed the moment I raised the check, the silence, the applause, the cameras, the truth hanging in the air like a verdict. I thought about every night I cried alone, every humiliation I swallowed, every moment I doubted my worth, and I realized revenge did not need rage, justice did not need volume, peace did not demand permission. My phone buzzed with messages from co-workers who had watched the gala live stream. They sent heart emojis, and one wrote, "Your grandmother would be proud." I held the phone against my chest for a long moment, breathing slow, steady, calm, because I could feel her presence in the quiet of the house. I could feel her kindness woven into the foundation of who I had become. And in that stillness, I whispered thank you again to her, to the life I rebuilt, to the truth that had finally spoken louder than every lie they told. And if someone watching ever needed courage, I wanted them to know that soft power is still power, and that dignity is louder than cruelty. And as if answering my thought, the email notification chimed the event committee thanking me for the donation and confirming the announcement of the Elena Cole Scholarship. I smiled into the empty room and whispered one last sentence. My justice was never loud, but it was real. And for anyone who believes in quiet justice, silent revenge and dignity over money, they would understand why that night mattered. Because sometimes the sweetest victory is truth spoken calmly on a stage that once would have never invited you to stand upon it. And if someone needed closure, they could simply comment Elena for truth and closure. In the weeks after the gala, the air in Seattle turned sharper, November wind scraping leaves across the sidewalks of Medina, and for a while there was silence. No emails, no calls, no demands. Then slowly the audacity returned, like it always does when people believe your dignity can be rented if they phrase their requests sweetly enough. The first message came from Robert, a voicemail cracked with forced humility. He said the roof had finally collapsed. He said he needed $10,000 to repair it before winter rain destroyed the beams. He said he knew I had plenty now and that family should help each other. His voice trembled at the word family, as if he could conjure history with a single syllable. I listened to the message, once expressionless, then pressed. Save because receipts matter. A day later, Evan sent a text, a single line, like a ping of entitlement. "Can you recommend me for a job?" I replied with no words. Just silence, because entitlement was a language he understood too well. In early December, I decided to end the drifting ambiguity. I sat at my glass desk overlooking Lake Washington, the water black under the winter sky, and drafted 2 formal documents that read like polite boundaries wrapped in legal language. The first was addressed to Robert and Linda. I wrote that any financial reconciliation required full repayment of the $12,400 taken from the 529 account, plus 6% interest due, within 9 months' payments, processed through automatic debit to avoid disputes. I wrote that this was not punishment, only restoration. I printed the document and signed my name in steady ink. The second letter was shorter, addressed to both of them, detailing that any contact moving forward required a written apology, acknowledging the harm, and that after the apology, there would be 12 months of no contact to prevent further emotional disruption. It was clean measured. Professional, I placed both documents into envelopes and mailed them to the Tacoma address that still smelled in my memory, like lemon cleaner and resentment. A week later, Robert called again, insisting the letters were dramatic, insisting lawyers were unnecessary, insisting that I should just trust them. His voice cracked between anger and pleading. I let it ring until voicemail. Then I sent him a short email attaching the same documents in PDF format I wrote. This ensures clarity for everyone, nothing more. The coldness of the line hit harder than anger. Silence can bruise deeper than shouting. A few days before Christmas, a handwritten letter arrived, Linda's cursive, still elegant. She said pride had made them harsh. She said families fight and forgive. She said if I signed a form handing her access to my financial advisor, she could manage the repayment schedule herself. The manipulation so transparent it felt almost comical. I read the letter twice, then slipped it into a drawer alongside every bank statement from the stolen 529. That night, the winter rain lashed against the windows, and I brewed tea, letting the steam curl around my face as I opened my laptop to draft the next step. The mini revenge was simple, subtle, petty, enough to taste sweet without bitterness. I emailed them a clean auto-debit agreement, complete with routing numbers to fill in interest schedule, late penalties, the tone polite and distant. I ended the email with, "Thank you for addressing this responsibly." They never respond to maturity because it reminds them they lost control. January arrived, and snow dusted the quiet sidewalks of Medina. My neighbors walked dogs in the early morning frost, and inside my house I checked my inbox just once a day. Robert had replied with a single line, "We will not sign anything. Your behavior is cruel." I answered with 4 words, "Then there is nothing." Those 4 words broke the last spine of entitlement. For the next month, they sent messages alternating between guilt and begging. Linda wrote that she had health problems that I should visit like a good daughter, that she was ready to move forward. Evan texted that he had applied for jobs and needed a reference. He promised he had changed, promised that Paris had humbled him, promised that he would make the family proud if I helped him. Promises from people who never kept any for me. I answered none. Boundaries are only real when enforced. One evening in February, as the sun dipped behind the lake, turning the water red gold, my phone rang with a Tacoma area code. I let it ring, then blocked the number. I blocked their emails. I blocked Evan's social media requests. I severed the digital routes they used to reach into my life. And something inside me unclenched at the silence that followed for the first time. It felt like oxygen. Late that month, a mutual acquaintance sent a message saying Robert had been asking around about legal options to force family reconciliation. The idea was absurd, but entitlement often breeds delusion. I forwarded the acquaintance a screenshot of my boundary letter and told them there would be no discussion. I never heard about it again in March. The final twist arrived. A thin envelope forwarded through my lawyer. Linda and Robert had tried to open a joint account to set up a repayment, but without signing the apology and no contact terms. They wanted the money arrangement without accountability. My lawyer asked how I wanted to respond. I said, "Do nothing, silence is a full sentence," on a rainy Thursday morning. I sat in my kitchen wearing a soft gray sweater coffee, steaming in my mug. The washing machine humming in the background, I realized something quiet and profound. I had stopped waiting for them to change. I no longer cared if they regretted anything. My life no longer circled their orbit. That was the real revenge. Not money, not humiliation, but the absence of their power. I opened my laptop and sent the final email short and steady. Since you did not agree to the terms, there will be no further engagement. Your numbers have been blocked. I wish you health and peace goodbye. Then I pressed send, and after that, I blocked every remaining channel. The silence that followed was not empty, it was earned. Sometimes no is not a door slammed, but a gate locked gently from the inside. And as spring crept towards Seattle with cherry blossoms blooming along Lake Washington, I realized that freedom can sound like nothing at all, but feel like everything. By April, the cherry blossoms along Lake Washington had begun to fall in pale pink drifts, petals gathering on sidewalks like soft confetti. And in that strange quiet after blocking my family, I discovered that silence has texture. It feels clean, it feels earned, and it always reveals the truth faster than confrontation. A neighbor in Tacoma messaged me one morning saying someone from my old street had asked if contractors ever came to repair Linda and Robert's roof. Apparently, people had started comparing stories. One neighbor swore the shingles had looked the same for 3 years. Another joked that the only thing ever repaired on that house was their pride rumors, that once worked against me, began folding in the opposite direction. People whispered that maybe the polite daughter had never been the problem at all when truth travels without force. It moves like wind, subtle but unstoppable. By early May, Wayfinder signed a new logistics contract and we expanded to 2 additional floors. Engineers brought in blueprints, investors toured the office. But I did not post a single photo. I did not send announcements to those who had once ignored my existence. Instead, I made quiet choices. I increased our community scholarship budget. I approved paid internships for students who had been told college was beyond them. Money became a tool for rebuilding, not revenge, though sometimes the two overlap anyway. Late one Friday afternoon, I visited the Tacoma Public Library, a building that smelled faintly of dust and possibility. I spoke with the director and offered to fund 1 year of free coding classes for 3 girls from low-income schools. I wrote small notes to slip inside their welcome packets, 1 sentence each, for girls told you do not deserve help. I did not sign my name because power does not need a spotlight to exist. That was my mini revenge, not against my family, but against the lie that only chosen children deserve opportunity in June. An email arrived from a tech forum moderator asking if I had meant to remove family photos from Dropbox. They noticed, because Linda had posted online that I had stolen them. The accusation was almost absurd. After all those years, they had used my photos to decorate their perfect image, and now the absence of my name stung. I said nothing. Explanation was a currency I no longer spent around that same time. The story of the gala reached small business newsletters, one article titled, "Quiet Justice in Seattle," another simply calling it Truth on Stage. I read the articles while drinking tea in my living room, sunlight reflecting off the lake like silver threads, and something inside me felt peaceful in July. A mutual acquaintance from Tacoma sent screenshots of a Facebook status Linda had written. She claimed she was sick. She claimed her children had abandoned her. She said sacrifices were never appreciated. The comments started with pity, then curiosity. Then a name appeared asking directly, "What happened to the 86,000? Someone else asked about the 4 withdrawals from the 529 that never went to the roof. Someone tagged the neighbor who had confirmed no workers ever visited the house within hours. The post was quietly edited, then deleted. Truth does not erase so easily, though screenshots lived on conversations too. Evan's name came up in another message. The acquaintance said he had been let go from a software company during probation because his resume did not match his actual skill level, including claims of projects he never completed. Likely because he assumed I would cover for him when the company asked for references. He had given my name, the HR department emailed me. I responded truthfully with a short statement that I could not verify any of the claims. I did not insult him. I did not expose his past, I simply refused to lie. Honesty can be a form of revenge, too. Softer but sharper because it cannot be argued with. 2 weeks later, Evan posted online that people were sabotaging him. Strangers commented, asking if this was about the $86,000. He did not answer. Sometimes, humiliation is quiet, spread by whispers and screenshots and undeniable math. Wayfinder continued expanding 2 new floors filled with engineers and analysts and interns who reminded me of my younger self, hungry for a chance without needing permission. One afternoon, I approved a donation for Tacoma's girls in STEM summer camp, and as I signed the letter, I realized I spent more on helping strangers than my family ever spent on helping me. And it did not make me bitter. It made me free by August. The gossip about the roof had turned into something like neighborhood folklore. People joked that Linda could get an Olympic medal in creative accounting. Someone else wrote that Karma had finally remembered their address. I did not join any of it. I did not laugh or comment or celebrate. I walked through my house barefoot, the hardwood cool beneath my feet, the lake breeze lifting the curtains, and I understood something my grandmother Elena tried to teach me in her last days. Revenge is loud. Justice is quiet peace, is silence. I looked at the framed bus pass on my wall. The green faded with age and whispered, "Thank you to the girl who took the bus alone and coded late at night and kept receipts even when no one believed she needed them in the kitchen. The washing machine hummed like a soft heartbeat in the walls, and I brewed coffee, breathing in its warm, steady scent. The world outside kept spinning, but inside my house, everything was finally still. And if someone asked me why I never fought back louder, I would tell them this sometimes. Truth needs no audience. It just needs time. Sometimes karma does not need to shout it, just needs space. And sometimes healing looks like a quiet morning near a silver lake with no one calling your name for the wrong reasons. By December, the rain returned to Medina in long silver sheets that whispered against the glass walls of my living room, the kind of steady winter rain that makes the world outside blur into soft watercolor. Inside the house, everything was warm and gentle. The kitchen lights glowing gold across the hardwood, the washing machine humming a low, steady rhythm from the laundry room like a heartbeat. Hidden in the walls, I sat at the dining table with a pen in hand and a stack of printed papers before me, the official charter for the Elena Cole Fund, a scholarship written in clean legal language that promised something simple and powerful every year. $8,600 would go to a girl studying STEM who had been told she did not deserve help. The number mattered because it mirrored the $86,000 that once felt like a verdict on my worth. Now it became a gift, a door, a bridge, a quiet apology from the universe to someone else who needed it. I signed my name, slowly feeling the ink press into the page, and when I lifted the pen, my breath shook just a little. Not from sadness, but from the gentle realization that peace can arrive silently and still feel enormous. The rain tapped harder on the windows, and I leaned back in my chair, thinking of every moment that had led here, every humiliation swallowed, every night, coding with tired hands, every small receipt tucked away, because someday the truth might need it. None of it owned me anymore. The house smelled of warm bread from the oven, and somewhere in the hallway the dryer clicked, switching cycles, ordinary sounds that once would have been drowned out by chaos. Now they were music. I walked to the wall where the bus pass hung in its glass frame. The green faded, the edges curled slightly with age. I remembered that girl carrying a backpack heavier than her confidence, sitting alone on morning buses and pretending she did not care. I touched the glass lightly with my fingertips and whispered, "Thank you," because she survived long enough to become me. I opened my journal and wrote the final entry for the year. The handwriting, steady, they invested in image. I invested in peace. The words did not need to be beautiful. They only needed to be true. Outside the lake shimmered like liquid steel beneath the moonlight, raindrops tracing slow silver threads along the surface. I made tea and stood by the window, letting the steam warm my face. The house was silent, but it was not lonely. The silence was proof that I no longer waited for calls that hurt. Proof that I no longer asked for permission to exist. Proof that self-worth is not something others grant, but something you build quietly until no one can take it away. Sometimes I wondered if my parents ever sat in their kitchen and realized what they lost, not the money, not the house, but the daughter who had once tried so hard to earn love that should have been given freely. I did not wish them pain. I wished them clarity, because justice without cruelty is possible. I learned that from Elena. Her voice, still soft in my memory, keep receipts, build peace. The world would expect rage, but healing chose silence. A few days before Christmas, I received a letter from a young woman who had been chosen as the first scholarship recipient. She wrote that her guidance counselor told her to aim lower, that her mother said engineering was for boys, that she felt invisible until she opened the acceptance email. She ended with one sentence that made my throat tighten. Someone believed in me before I believed in myself. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer with the charter documents. Small proof that the worst parts of my past had become the best parts of someone else's beginning. The night grew colder, and I lit the fireplace. The soft crackling filling the room, I curled into a blanket and closed my eyes, letting peace settle over me like snowfall. This was not the life I was given. It was the life I built. One boundary, one night of coding, one quiet decision at a time. I had not become rich to impress them. I had not bought a house to prove anything. I had done all of it to become free. And freedom tasted like warm tea and rain, and a future no longer tied to apology. Sometimes justice is not the applause at a gala or the stunned silence of those who once mocked you. Sometimes justice is waking up with a calm heart and a clean kitchen and no unread messages from people who used to own your pain. I stood again at the window watching raindrops slide down the glass, each one catching a fragment of moonlight. And I thought about how silence had once felt like abandonment. Now it felt like safety, like a door gently closed to keep the storm outside. If anyone listening to my story had ever been told they were not enough or did not deserve help or existed only to serve someone else's pride, I wanted them to hear this clearly. Your life is not over. Your worth is not gone. You can walk away without shouting. You can build without permission. You can choose peace without asking. And if this revenge story money felt like your family karma, tell me where you are watching from. This is standing up for yourself, reclaiming respect, revenge through truth, justice without hate, and finally peace that no one can steal.